I'm Maria Wilson, and for 3 years, I'd been the senior security architect at Whitehound Industries. My job was simple: find vulnerabilities before bad actors did. I was good at it. Maybe too good. Picture this: you're the person everyone calls when something breaks, but nobody listens to when you try to prevent the breaking. You've stopped 17 major security incidents in 3 years. You've saved the company millions in potential losses. Yet somehow, you're still the person who overthinks everything. The payments rollout meeting started like any other. 23 engineers crammed into conference room B, laptops open, coffee cooling in ceramic mugs branded with our company logo. The air conditioning hummed overhead, struggling against the body heat and tension. Our CTO, Alex Morrison, stood at the whiteboard outlining the timeline with his signature red marker. Launch in 2 weeks. No delays. No excuses. Morrison had joined Whitehound 6 months earlier from a Silicon Valley startup that had been acquired for $300 million. He brought with him a philosophy of move fast and break things that made my security-first approach seem antiquated. His previous company had launched products in weeks, not months. He made sure everyone knew this. Maria's identified some potential security concerns, Morrison announced, his tone already suggesting these concerns were inconvenient rather than critical. He said potential like it was a dirty word. I opened my laptop, pulling up the vulnerability assessment I'd spent 3 weeks preparing. Screenshots, code analysis, penetration test results. 237 pages of detailed documentation. The authentication layer has 3 exploitable weaknesses. The session management tokens are predictable, following a sequential pattern that could be reverse-engineered in under 4 hours. The API endpoints lack proper rate limiting, allowing unlimited requests per second. And there's a race condition in the transaction validation logic where simultaneous requests can bypass our fraud detection algorithms. The silence that followed wasn't contemplative. It was the kind of silence that comes before dismissal. Morrison's jaw tightened. His expensive suit, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly salary, seemed to grow tighter around his shoulders. These are theoretical edge cases, Maria. We've been developing this for 8 months. Our beta testing showed 0 issues. Beta testing with 1,000 trusted users isn't the same as production with millions of transactions from unknown actors, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I need another week to patch these holes. 7 days to implement proper token randomization, throttling mechanisms, and transaction sequencing. A week? The lead developer, James Carter, laughed, that particular laugh that engineers use when they think someone doesn't understand the real world. Maria, we've got regulatory deadlines. Real deadlines. The Federal Reserve expects our compliance documentation by month end. Not hypothetical disaster scenarios. Around the table, heads nodded like synchronized swimmers. I watched colleagues I'd worked with for years, people who'd seen me identify critical vulnerabilities in their code, people who'd watched me prevent data breaches, dismiss months of careful analysis with knowing smirks. The marketing team had already scheduled the press release for Thursday morning. Sales had promised enterprise clients the launch date. Our biggest client, Ocean View Financial, had restructured their entire payment infrastructure around our promised delivery. The room felt smaller suddenly. 23 people, but the walls seemed to be closing in. I could smell the lingering scent of Morrison's cologne mixed with the metallic odor of stress sweat. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a frequency that made my teeth ache. Morrison stepped closer to my seat, his shadow falling across my laptop screen. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority mixed with barely contained frustration. Maria, this paranoia of yours is becoming problematic. You see threats everywhere. It's cancerous behavior, and frankly, you slow everyone down. No wonder your own team hates working with you. The words hit like ice water in my veins. I felt every pair of eyes in the room studying my reaction, waiting for the outburst, the defensive argument, the emotional breakdown that would prove his point. Waiting for me to become the hysterical woman who couldn't handle feedback. 23 people holding their breath, phones ready to record my meltdown. But here's something I learned from years of being the only woman in technical leadership meetings: your reaction becomes their ammunition. Get angry, and you're emotional. Stay calm, and you're unpassionate. Provide data, and you're overthinking. The game is rigged, so sometimes you have to stop playing by their rules. I nodded quietly. I understand, I said, closing my laptop with deliberate calm. The soft click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud in the tense room. You've made your position clear. Morrison smiled, mistaking my composure for capitulation. It was the kind of smile that said he'd won another battle against unnecessary caution. Good. James, let's proceed with the original timeline. I gathered my things slowly. My laptop bag. My notepad covered in security diagrams. The coffee mug that had grown cold during my presentation. I stood, straightened my blazer, and walked out. Behind me, conversations resumed immediately, the animated chatter of a team that had just been freed from bureaucratic interference. As if I'd never spoken. As if 3 years of preventing security breaches meant nothing. As if my track record of identifying critical vulnerabilities was suddenly irrelevant. Walking back to my office, I passed the break room where 3 junior developers were discussing the meeting. Finally, one said, someone put Maria in her place. Maybe now we can actually ship products instead of getting paralyzed by worst-case scenarios. I kept walking. That afternoon, I did what I always do when management ignores technical advice. I documented everything. Not just a simple email, but a comprehensive formal security assessment report. 47 pages detailing every vulnerability, with screenshots of vulnerable code, proof of concept exploits, and step-by-step remediation procedures. I estimated potential financial impact using industry-standard calculations, average cost per compromised record, regulatory fines, legal expenses, reputation damage. The numbers were staggering. Worst-case scenario, $2.3 billion in direct losses, plus incalculable damage to company valuation. I submitted copies through every official channel. The compliance team, headed by Patricia Kong, a former federal banking regulator who understood risk better than most. The audit committee, chaired by retired Judge Harold Foster. I filed it with our cyber insurance carrier, Pinnacle Risk Management, as required by our policy terms. I uploaded it to our internal risk management system, assigned it the highest priority classification. Then I sent a personal copy to my own encrypted email account. And printed a physical backup. And stored digital copies on 3 separate secure drives. Because here's what 20 years in technology taught me: when disasters happen, the first thing leadership does is claim nobody warned them. Documentation isn't just about compliance, it's about survival. Then I waited. But waiting isn't passive when you're a security professional. I spent the next 10 days monitoring our systems like a hawk studying prey. I set up additional logging on the payment infrastructure, capturing every API call, every authentication attempt, every transaction detail. I configured automated alerts for unusual patterns. I created dashboards that would detect the exact attack vectors I'd identified. Most importantly, I prepared. I drafted incident response procedures specifically for the vulnerabilities I'd discovered. Step-by-step remediation plans. Contact lists for emergency vendors. Scripts to automatically implement security patches. I even pre-negotiated emergency support contracts with 3 cybersecurity firms, just in case. My team, the people who supposedly hated working with me, began asking quiet questions. Raj Patel, my lead analyst, pulled me aside Tuesday morning. Maria, should we be concerned about launch week? Follow protocol, I told him. Document everything. Keep our incident response plans updated. But I could see in his eyes that he understood. The good ones always do. For 10 days, I watched the payments team work around the clock. The engineering floor transformed into a war zone of productivity. Pizza boxes stacked in the break room like cardboard monuments to determination. Engineers sleeping at their desks on inflatable mattresses ordered from Amazon. The cleaning staff had to navigate around bodies sprawled on couches, laptops still glowing on their chests. Morrison sent company-wide emails every other day, celebrating their dedication. This is what innovation looks like, he wrote. This is how you disrupt an industry. The stock price ticked upward on rumors of the revolutionary new payment system. Tech blogs wrote breathless previews about Whitehound's upcoming game-changer. Our PR team scheduled interviews with Morrison on 3 major financial networks. I watched from my office as temporary cots were delivered to the engineering floor. As the company cafeteria extended its hours to provide 24/7 food service. As Morrison hired massage therapists to come in twice daily to help engineers deal with stress and fatigue. Everything except address the security vulnerabilities. During those 10 days, something interesting happened. Other departments started reaching out to me quietly. The legal team's risk assessment specialist, Carol Brighton, scheduled a casual coffee meeting to discuss general cybersecurity trends. She didn't ask direct questions, but her concerns were obvious. The finance team's audit coordinator, Robert Chong, requested an updated copy of our cyber insurance policy limits. Even sales began having second thoughts. Our account manager for Oceanview Financial, Gregory Walsh, called Wednesday afternoon with what he described as routine technical questions from their CTO. Questions that sounded suspiciously like security concerns. The cracks were showing, but Morrison was too busy managing the heroic narrative to notice. For 10 days, I watched the payments team work around the clock. Pizza boxes stacked in the break room. Engineers sleeping at their desks. Morrison sent company-wide emails celebrating their dedication. The stock price ticked upward on rumors of the revolutionary new payment system. I spent those 10 days documenting everything. Screenshots of code repositories. Copies of design documents. Detailed timelines of every meeting, every warning ignored, every protocol bypassed in the name of speed. On launch morning, Morrison hosted a celebration breakfast in the main conference room. Not conference room B where he'd dismissed my warnings, but the executive conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Champagne at 9 a.m. served in crystal glasses normally reserved for client presentations. Congratulatory speeches about innovation and bold leadership. A photographer from the marketing team documented every moment for the company blog. I wasn't invited, but I could see the celebration from my office window. Morrison stood at the head of the table, raising his glass toward the sunrise, surrounded by exhausted engineers who managed weak smiles despite their fatigue. Today, we make history, his voice carried through the building's ventilation system. Today, Whitehound Industries becomes the fastest, most innovative payment processor in the financial sector. The first transaction processed at 9:17 a.m. A $47 coffee purchase from a startup in Portland. Morrison personally posted about it on LinkedIn, Twitter, and the company blog. The future of payments is here, he wrote, accompanied by screenshots of the transaction dashboard. By noon, we'd handled $12 million in payments. The system performed flawlessly from a user perspective. Transactions processed in under 2 seconds. No downtime. No user complaints. Morrison posted again on LinkedIn about disrupting the fintech space, hashtags about innovation and bold leadership. The post received 847 likes and 93 shares within 3 hours. Tech journalists began calling for interviews. Our stock price jumped 8% by market close. Morrison scheduled a celebratory happy hour for the entire engineering team at the Meridian Hotel's rooftop bar. We've earned this, he announced over the company Slack channel. But while Morrison celebrated, I was watching my monitoring dashboards with growing alarm. At 3:42 p.m., I detected the first anomalous pattern. Unusual API calls from IP addresses registered in Eastern Europe. Nothing dramatically obvious, sophisticated attackers never are. Just slight variations in request timing that suggested automated scripting. Session tokens being requested in sequential patterns that matched my vulnerability assessment exactly. At 6:18 p.m., I identified coordinated probing of our rate-limiting systems. Thousands of small requests from distributed sources, testing response times and error handling. Classic reconnaissance behavior. Someone was mapping our defenses. At 11:23 p.m., I watched as attackers began exploiting the race condition vulnerability. Simultaneous transaction requests designed to overwhelm our validation logic. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $90 there. Amounts designed to slip past fraud detection algorithms. I documented everything. Screenshots every 30 seconds. Network traffic analysis. Attack pattern recognition. I created a minute-by-minute timeline of the exploitation, cross-referenced with the vulnerability assessment I'd submitted 10 days earlier. At 1:15 a.m., I called Morrison's cell phone. Voicemail. I called James Carter. Voicemail. I called the operations center. Everything looks normal from here, the night supervisor told me. Transaction volume is high, but that's expected after launch day excitement. High transaction volume. They were seeing billion-dollar theft as launch day excitement. At 2:30 a.m., the magnitude became clear. The attackers had moved beyond small probes to industrial-scale exploitation. Automated scripts were generating thousands of transactions per second, each one leveraging the race condition to bypass fraud detection. Account balances were being drained faster than our monitoring systems could track. That's when my phone finally rang. Maria. Morrison's voice was tight, strained, barely controlled. In the background, I could hear shouting, keyboard clicking, the controlled chaos of a crisis response center. We need you in the office. Now. I dressed slowly, deliberately. Black jeans, comfortable shoes, a sweater warm enough for an all-nighter. No rush. I'd been preparing for this call for 10 days. I grabbed my laptop bag, my printed documentation, and the emergency response kit I'd prepared. During the 20-minute drive to the office, Morrison called twice more. Then James Carter. Then Patricia Kong from compliance. Each call more desperate than the last. Each voice carrying the weight of realization that theoretical vulnerabilities had become catastrophic reality. The office building looked different at 3 a.m. Security lights cast harsh shadows across the normally bustling lobby. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than usual, accompanied only by the hum of ventilation systems and my own steady breathing. The office was chaos unlike anything I'd seen in 15 years of crisis management. Engineers hunched over monitors, faces pale in the blue glow of error messages. The operations team had dark circles under their eyes, moving with the jittery energy of people surviving on caffeine and adrenaline. Empty energy drink cans littered every surface like evidence of a desperate battle against exhaustion. The air smelled of stress sweat, burned coffee, and electronic ozone from overheating servers. Whiteboards throughout the engineering floor were covered in frantic diagrams, IP addresses, stack traces, and debugging notes written in increasingly illegible handwriting. Someone had ordered Chinese food that sat untouched, growing cold while engineers tried to stop financial hemorrhaging. I walked toward my office, noting the faces I passed. Some looked relieved to see me. Others looked ashamed. A few couldn't make eye contact at all. That's when it happened. Morrison's footsteps thundered down the hallway like an approaching storm. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his face carrying the weight of career-ending disaster. My office door didn't just open, it slammed against the wall so hard that books fell from my shelf. Why were $1.2 billion in transactions drained overnight? He screamed, his voice cracking with rage and panic. Spittle flew from his mouth. His hands shook with exhaustion and terror. I looked up from my desk calmly, where I'd been reviewing the security protocols I'd recommended 10 days earlier. My printed documentation was spread across the surface in organized piles, vulnerability assessments, remediation procedures, incident response plans. Everything Morrison had dismissed as paranoid overthinking. Which vulnerability was exploited? I asked, my voice steady despite the chaos surrounding us. What? His voice cracked slightly. Behind him, I could see James Carter standing in the doorway, his face ashen with the realization of what their dismissal had cost. I identified 3 critical vulnerabilities in my assessment 10 days ago. Session management, rate limiting, or the race condition in transaction validation? Which attack vector did they use first? Morrison stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was drowning in air. The sound of keyboards and frantic phone conversations from the engineering floor created a soundtrack of desperation behind him. All 3, he whispered. I opened my laptop and pulled up the incident response plan I'd prepared, 60 pages of step-by-step procedures, emergency contacts, and remediation scripts. The attackers likely used automated scripts to exploit the predictable session tokens first. Sequential pattern analysis would have given them access to legitimate user sessions within 3 hours. They then overwhelmed our rate limiting to mask their activities while they mapped our full transaction infrastructure. Finally, they triggered the race condition to approve fraudulent transactions faster than our validation system could catch them. You knew this would happen. I documented the exact attack vectors in my security assessment. I pulled out my printed copy, 47 pages of technical analysis he'd dismissed as theoretical paranoia. The one you called cancerous thinking. Behind Morrison, a crowd had gathered. Engineers who'd laughed at my warnings 10 days ago now stood silent, understanding the magnitude of what my paranoia had predicted. Raj Patel was there, along with the junior developers who'd celebrated putting me in my place. They weren't laughing anymore. James Carter stepped forward, his voice barely audible. "Maria, we should have listened." I looked at him with the calm that comes from professional vindication. "James, this isn't about being right. This is about fixing the problem before we lose more money. Can you fix it?" Morrison's anger had transformed into desperate pleading. The man who'd called my expertise cancerous was now begging for that same expertise to save his career. "The immediate bleeding can be stopped within 6 hours. Full remediation will take 2 weeks. Exactly the timeline I originally requested. For the next 18 hours, I worked alongside the same team that had mocked my concerns. But the dynamic had shifted completely. Every suggestion I made was implemented immediately. Every protocol I recommended was followed without question. When I said we needed to take the payment system offline for emergency patches, nobody argued about lost revenue or client satisfaction. The first step was triage. I implemented emergency rate limiting that reduced our API throughput by 90% but stopped the automated exploitation. Then we invalidated every session token in the system, forcing legitimate users to re-authenticate but killing the attacker's access. Finally, we deployed temporary transaction sequencing that eliminated the race condition at the cost of processing speed. "We're hemorrhaging $50,000 per minute," Morrison said, watching the monitoring dashboard as I worked. "We were hemorrhaging $200,000 per minute before," I replied, not looking up from my screen. "Emergency surgery isn't pretty, but it saves lives." During those 18 hours, something remarkable happened. The team that had dismissed my warnings became my most effective collaborators. Engineers who'd rolled their eyes at security protocols now asked detailed questions about threat modeling. Developers who'd called my assessments overthinking requested training on secure coding practices. Raj coordinated with our legal team to notify affected clients. James managed communications with regulatory agencies. Even Morrison, once he moved past his initial panic, proved effective at handling executive-level crisis management. We stopped the hemorrhaging by noon on day 2. The attackers, faced with rapidly changing security measures and increasingly difficult exploitation, moved on to easier targets. We'd lost $1.2 billion, but prevented losses that could have reached $3 billion or more. The forensics investigation took another week. Working with the FBI's cybercrime unit and 3 private security firms, we traced the attack to a sophisticated Eastern European syndicate with connections to at least 12 similar breaches. The attack pattern matched my vulnerability assessment with 94% accuracy. "They read your report," FBI Special Agent Patricia Williams told me during the investigation. "Everything they did was textbook exploitation of the weaknesses you identified. If you hadn't documented the attack vectors so thoroughly, we never would have traced them this quickly." 3 weeks after the breach, we implemented proper security controls and relaunched the payment system. This time, my team led the security architecture from day 1. The new system processed transactions 15% faster than the original, with security measures that exceeded industry standards. Morrison never publicly apologized, but 3 weeks later, I received the largest performance bonus in company history. $250,000, plus stock options that vested immediately. My security team's budget was doubled from $2.3 million to $4.6 million annually. I was given veto power over any new product launch and a seat on the executive committee. The regulatory investigation that followed cited our rapid response and comprehensive remediation as exemplary. Despite the initial losses, our transparent handling of the crisis actually improved our reputation with enterprise clients. Our stock price recovered within 2 months and reached all-time highs within 6 months. Morrison quietly left the company 6 months later for what were described as new opportunities in blockchain innovation. James Carter, to his credit, remained and became one of Security First Development's strongest advocates. He still leads our secure coding training program. But here's what I learned that matters most: being right isn't enough. Sometimes you have to let people fail spectacularly to understand the value of what you bring. My job wasn't to convince skeptics through perfect arguments or detailed presentations. My job was to protect the company, document the risks thoroughly, and be ready when reality inevitably proved me right. The next time someone calls your expertise paranoia, remember this story. Sometimes the person everyone thinks is slowing things down is actually the only one preventing disaster. Sometimes what looks like obstruction is actually protection. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is remain calm while others panic, professional while others blame, and prepared while others scramble. Your experience might not involve $1.2 billion, but I guarantee you've encountered situations where your careful analysis was dismissed as overthinking, where your attention to detail was labeled as obstruction, where your professional concerns were called emotional reactions. Trust your expertise. Document everything meticulously. Keep detailed records of warnings ignored and protocols bypassed. And when the inevitable crisis hits, be ready to solve it professionally and completely. What's the biggest disaster you prevented that nobody thanked you for until disaster struck? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes we need to remind each other that being cautious isn't being paranoid, it's being responsible. That slowing down isn't obstruction, it's careful engineering. That asking hard questions isn't negativity, it's professional due diligence.